They said she was just a quiet manager at a small-town supermarket, the kind of woman who slipped through the aisles without drawing attention. But that night, the silence was shattered when a man known for terrorizing the neighborhood dragged her by the collar and tried to make her a public example. In front of dozens of eyes, he mocked her, threatened her, promised to burn down everything she worked for. What no one saw coming was how the next 15 minutes would end, with the bully everyone feared kneeling at her feet, begging for forgiveness. How does a woman so overlooked carry a truth so powerful it could flip fear back onto the one who spread it? What would you have done if you were there? Looked away or stood your ground? Tell me your thoughts below, and if you believe strength comes in unexpected forms, hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more. Your voice keeps stories like this alive. It began with the simplest sound, a carton of milk slipping from someone's grasp, striking the tile and bursting open in a splash that cut through the steady hum of checkout beeps and whispered conversations. Every head turned, and in that frozen moment, Cole Harris tightened his grip on Grace Miller's collar and yanked her forward. She stumbled into the middle of the fluorescent-lit aisle, her thin frame dwarfed by his broad shoulders. His voice carried over the shelves, harsh and taunting. "You think you can ignore me, Grace? Pay up, or this whole place goes up in smoke." His crew spread out behind him, blocking the exits, their heavy boots thudding against the floor. Shoppers shrank back, pressing against the racks of cereal boxes, eyes wide, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Grace's hands held on to her worn ledger, the one she used to count every item that passed through her store. She did not speak, she did not fight back. Not yet. Her chin tilted down, eyes shadowed, her body steady as though she were carved from stone. Cole jerked her closer, sneering, "Look at me when I'm talking to you." But she didn't flinch, didn't break. Around them, the crowd's silence grew heavier, like the store itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which would give way first, the fragile woman who never raised her voice, or the brute who had ruled this town's fear for too long. 15 minutes earlier, the store carried its usual hum, the buzz of lights above and the low thrum of refrigerators filling the quiet between footsteps. Then the calm outside cracked with the growl of engines. 4 trucks swung into the lot, headlights sweeping across the glass doors like searchlights. Cole Harris stepped out first, his boots hitting the pavement with a weight that made people freeze where they stood. His men followed close behind, their laughter too loud, too sharp, daring anyone to stop them. Mothers hurried children into cars, grocery bags hugged tight to their chests. The slam of metal doors echoed like gunfire. Trouble had arrived. Inside, Grace Miller stacked cans with a patience that seemed unshakable, each motion deliberate, each line squared, as if precision itself kept the chaos at bay. Marcus, the gray-haired guard, leaned near a cashier, whispering, "They're back," his fingers brushing the old radio at his belt. Last time they smashed registers for fun. The cashier's breath hitched, her eyes sliding toward Grace. Grace never looked up, never faltered. Her hands stayed steady, her rhythm exact, like someone trained to keep calm when storms closed in. At the far end of the aisle, Mrs. Whitaker, a longtime customer, slowed her cart, her gaze fixed on Grace. "That girl," she murmured, "she doesn't move like the rest of us." Something in the way Grace folded her rag and lined the cans felt too measured, too rehearsed. Before the thought could leave her lips, the front doors banged open, rattling the glass in their frames. Cole entered first, his jacket stretched across his chest, his stare sweeping the room like a spotlight. His crew spread out without a word, each one taking a post by instinct. Knuckles cracked, keys spun, heavy boots slammed the tile. Fear spread faster than sound as shoppers tried to melt into the shelves. Grace rose quietly, setting the last can in place, wiping her palms on the folded rag. She stood still, beneath the harsh lights, a figure so calm it unsettled even the man who had come to own the room. Cole stepped further inside the supermarket, his boots striking the tiles with the rhythm of ownership. The men behind him spread through the aisles, knocking over displays as if chaos were their signature. A tower of apples crashed to the ground, rolling across the floor with dull thuds while laughter rose from his crew. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing long shadows as Cole's grin widened. He carried himself like a king, entering his throne room, and the shoppers shrank back into corners, unwilling to meet his eyes. Grace Miller stood near the center of the aisle, her hands folded loosely over the rag she had just placed down. Her frame looked small against the wide glare of Cole's presence, but she did not move. One of the men swaggered past her, his shoulder brushing hers before his hand snapped out, grabbing a box of cereal and tossing it to the ground. He smirked, then leaned closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "What are you staring at, sweetheart?" Grace's gaze flicked toward him just long enough for the smallest shake of her head. The motion was sharp, quick, almost invisible, but it caught the attention of a young stock boy only a few feet away. The boy had stepped forward, his fists clenched, wanting to defend her, yet she silenced him with that single movement. Her eyes told him everything. Stand down. Cole noticed the exchange and laughed loud enough for his voice to echo. Even the kids want to play hero tonight. He moved closer, circling Grace slowly, like a predator testing the strength of its prey. His men shifted their weight, blocking every path of escape while their chuckles bounced off the shelves. Grace remained steady, her chin still angled downward, her breathing calm as though the world around her belonged to someone else. Then Cole's hand came crashing onto her shoulder, gripping hard, his fingers curling into the fabric of her shirt. He pulled her toward him, forcing her to face him. "Look at me when I speak to you," he barked. His breath carried the sharp edge of cheap liquor, his words meant to sting. Around them, the shoppers held their breath. One child whimpered, before being hushed quickly by his mother. The aisles of cereal and bread became a stage, and every eye was fixed on the confrontation. Grace's body swayed with the pull, but she did not resist. Her silence was louder than any protest, her stillness heavier than any fight. Cole's sneer faltered for a brief second, confusion flickering through his eyes before he masked it again with anger. He shoved her back a step, his voice rising. "This is my store now. You either pay or you learn what happens to people who think they can ignore me." His men stomped the ground in agreement, their boots echoing like a drumbeat of intimidation. Yet Grace's eyes finally lifted. Just a fraction, but enough. They locked onto Cole's face, steady, unwavering, unafraid. In that single glance, something unspoken passed between them. It was not defiance, it was something deeper, something that made Cole pause ever so slightly before barking louder to cover the hesitation. The crowd remained frozen, torn between terror and the strange calm radiating from the woman who refused to flinch. The air thickened with tension, every second stretching longer than the last as the storm continued to build. Cole leaned in so close the fluorescent lights glared off the blade he snapped open in his hand. The steel caught the air sharp and cold as he pressed the point just near Grace's side. His voice dropped lower, quieter than before, yet far more dangerous. "I am going to count to 3, and if you don't give me what I want, this store will be nothing but ashes." His crew shifted behind him, closing ranks around the exits, the sound of boots scraping tile echoing through the aisles like chains dragging across concrete. Grace did not move, her breathing steady, her eyes lowered, her hands still loosely at her sides. She glanced once to her right, then to her left, her gaze sweeping quick across the men who thought they had caged her in. One limped slightly, each step heavier on his left leg. Another's eyes stayed glued to his phone, the screen lighting his face even in the tension. The two closest to the door stood too far apart, leaving a gap if someone knew how to use it. She cataloged everything, silently, her mind working as calm as her body appeared. Marcus, the old guard, had stepped closer, now his hand hovering over the radio on his belt. His jaw was tight, his knuckles pale, but he hesitated. He could see what Grace saw, though he did not fully understand it. She was not panicked. She was calculating. The customers around them pressed deeper into the shelves, trying to disappear among boxes of cereal and paper towels. The silence in the store was so heavy that the buzzing of the lights sounded like thunder. Cole tightened his grip, jerking Grace closer until their faces were only inches apart. His eyes burned with frustration, his voice breaking into a growl. "Do you hear me? I said 3 seconds." He started the count. 1. The knife glinted. 2. A bead of sweat ran down his temple, though he would never admit fear. Grace tilted her head, the smallest fraction, as though listening to something only she could hear. The rag she had folded earlier still rested in her hand, and her thumb brushed over the corner, like a rhythm, a beat she had memorized long ago. 3. The word tore from Cole's mouth, a snarl that tried to mask the unease growing in his chest. The shoppers froze, every body tensed, every breath held. Grace did not move. She stood unmoving, her silence heavier than any scream, her calm pressing back against his fury. The moment stretched, sharp enough to cut the air itself, the balance of fear shifting, though no one yet understood how.
The snap of fabric ripped through the silence louder than the buzzing lights above. One of Cole's men had reached forward and yanked hard, his fist tearing straight through the seam of Grace's shirt. The sound echoed down the aisle like a gunshot, and when the cotton fell away, the entire store froze. On her back, beneath the harsh glare of the lights, was ink, carved deep into her skin, the unmistakable emblem of Delta Force, the black wings and dagger cutting sharp across scars that told stories no one there could imagine. Long-healed wounds stretched over her shoulders and down her ribs, marks of fire and steel that no ordinary life could leave behind. Cole's grin faltered. For a second, his voice caught in his throat, the swagger that filled every word before now drained away. Grace straightened her shoulders, her frame suddenly towering, though she had not grown an inch. Her chin lifted, her eyes cold and steady as she spoke his name clear and sharp. Cole Harris. Not the title he boasted in the streets, but the name stripped bare, the one he had tried to bury beneath bravado. The crew around him shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting from her scars to his face. From the crowd, an old man stepped forward, leaning heavy on a cane. His voice trembled, but the words carried across the aisle. "That's Sergeant Grace Miller," he said. "I know that face. I read about her years ago. Iraq, 2007. She carried 3 men out under fire." Beside him, a woman in scrubs covered her mouth, tears rising as she whispered, "I was there. I patched up soldiers that day. She was one of them." Her words cracked open the silence even wider, and suddenly the weight of every eye in the store was no longer on Grace, it was on Cole. He tried to sneer, to laugh it off, but his jaw tightened, his hand on the knife unsteady. Grace did not move closer. She didn't have to. She let the scars speak louder than any threat, the ink on her skin louder than any boast. The rag she had folded earlier slipped from her hand, falling to the floor without sound. She no longer needed it. The shoppers who had hidden in fear began to step out slowly, forming a wall behind her, not because she asked them to, but because something in them shifted. Respect rose where fear had been. Cole's men glanced at each other, their smirks fading, their stance less sure. And in the center of it all, Cole stood staring at the truth carved into her skin, realizing for the first time that the woman he thought weak was something far beyond his reach. The rumble came first, a low vibration rolling across the parking lot that made the glass doors tremble in their frames. Heads turned as headlights split the darkness outside, cutting sharp beams through the windows. Engines growled louder, building into a roar until the automatic doors swung wide and the sound flooded in. One by one, the machines appeared, lined in chrome and steel, a fleet of customized muscle cars gleaming under the streetlights like predators on the hunt. They stopped in formation, doors flung open in perfect unison. 9 men stepped out, moving with the weight of soldiers who had marched together through fire. Their bodies were carved muscle, their stares sharp and unblinking. Each stride carried purpose as they crossed the threshold into the supermarket, boots striking the tile with a rhythm that drowned out the nervous whispers of the crowd. They fanned out naturally, without a word, circling around Grace until she stood at the center of a wall of flesh and resolve. The air shifted thick with something far more powerful than threat. It was loyalty made visible. One of them, a tall figure with a scar trailing down his jaw, spoke first, his voice low but steady. "We've got you, Sergeant." His words hung heavy like an oath. Another clapped a fist against his chest before planting himself between Cole's men and the customers. The rest spread wide, their formation flawless, every step echoing a lifetime of training that no street gang could imitate. Cole's crew stumbled back, uncertainty flashing across faces that moments ago had carried only arrogance. The gap in their confidence widened as the newcomers stared them down, eyes cold, hard, unshaken. The leader among them shifted slightly, giving Grace a nod, the kind exchanged only between those who had survived battlefields. It was not a question, it was a reminder. She was not alone, and never had been. Grace exhaled slowly, her chest rising as she squared her shoulders against Cole. The scars on her back glistened under the fluorescent lights, but now they looked less like wounds and more like medals. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the turn, their fear melting into awe. For the first time, Cole's smirk disappeared completely, replaced by the twitch of a man who had just seen the tide break against him. His knife lowered fraction by fraction, the bravado slipping like water through his fingers. The 9 men stood still, unyielding, their silence more menacing than any threat. In that frozen moment, Cole realized he was no longer staring down a lone woman, but an entire brotherhood forged in battle and ready to close in if she gave the word. Grace stepped forward, the wall of men parting just enough to let her through, their eyes still locked on Cole and his crew. The store felt smaller now, every breath of the crowd pressing in, every light above burning hotter. Cole tried to stand tall, the knife still in his hand, but his grip betrayed him, the blade trembling slightly under the weight of silence. Grace's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Cole Harris, kneel." The words struck harder than any shove. For a moment, he laughed too loud, too forced, trying to cling to the scraps of his bravado. "You think I am going to bow to you?" he spat. But even as he spoke, his eyes darted to the 9 men circling, to the scars still visible on Grace's back. The laughter thinned into nothing, his throat tight. She didn't move closer. She didn't need to. Her command hung heavy, and the room itself seemed to lean toward him, demanding his answer. Around them, shoppers began stepping out from hiding, their fear replaced by something fiercer. Mothers held their children tighter, but their gazes stayed on Cole, daring him to resist. The young stock boy who had almost rushed in earlier clenched his fists again, but this time with pride, not panic. The weight of the moment bore down from every direction. Grace's tone did not rise, yet every word carried iron. "Kneel or be exposed to every soul in this town for the coward you really are." The 9 men behind her shifted once, boots striking the floor in unison like a drumbeat of war. Cole's knees buckled before he realized it, his body betraying the defiance he wanted to hold.
He dropped down onto the tile, his head lowered, his knife clattering against the floor, echoing loud enough to silence even the hum of the lights. "Say it," Grace ordered, her eyes steady. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking as it came. "I am sorry. I will not come back here. I will never lay a hand on anyone again." The words filled the store, and the silence that followed was shattered by applause. Hands clapped from every corner, voices rising together as if a dam had broken. Cole knelt frozen, his pride stripped bare, while Grace stood above, unshaken. She did not smile, she did not gloat. She simply turned her gaze to the crowd, letting them see that strength did not always roar. It sometimes stood in quiet command, unyielding until the world itself bowed.
Cole still knelt on the cold tile, his hands trembling as the weight of his own words lingered in the air. The roar of applause faded into a hush, and all that remained was the sound of shallow breaths and the distant hum of the refrigerators. Grace did not move toward him. She simply turned her back on the man who once ruled through fear, as if he no longer existed. That gesture alone carried more power than any threat could. A child's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "Why do you work here if you are so strong?" Every head turned to see a boy standing near his mother, eyes wide with wonder instead of fear. Grace looked at him, her expression calm, her voice steady. "A soldier can leave the battlefield," she said, "but a soldier never stops serving. I chose this place because peace is worth protecting too." Her words rolled through the aisle, heavier than any weapon, and for a moment, even the harsh lights seemed warmer. Cole's men shifted, uncertain glances passing between them. Without their leader's mask of confidence, they looked smaller, ordinary men stripped of the shadow they once carried. They backed away, one step at a time, until the crowd itself pressed them out. The shoppers, who had been hiding minutes ago, now stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a human wall. Cole's crew pushed past with lowered eyes, retreating into the night, where their engines soon roared in defeat. From within the circle of faces, an old veteran tapped his cane against the floor, his voice rough but sure. "This town doesn't forget its own," he said. "You carried men out of fire once, and tonight you carried us out of fear." A nurse, still in scrubs, wiped at her eyes, nodding through tears. "You gave me back my faith," she whispered. Every word landed on Cole like stones, though he had already vanished through the doors. Grace did not thank them. She did not need to. She simply folded her arms across her chest, the scars on her skin visible under the harsh lights. They were not marks of shame, but of survival, and every gaze in the store saw them that way now. The crowd stood in silence, not out of fear, but of respect. For the first time in years, the store felt safe, and no one doubted who had given them that. The crowd lingered long after Cole and his men had vanished, their engines swallowed by the night. People did not scatter back to their routines. Instead, they pressed closer to Grace, their voices hushed as if they stood in the presence of something rare. From between the shelves, a young girl, no older than 17, stepped forward, her hands trembling as she clutched a notebook to her chest. She looked at Grace, not with fear, but with a desperate hope. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How do you keep standing when the whole world tries to push you down?" Grace turned her gaze to the girl, steady and unblinking. "No one is born unshakable," she said. "You learn it the moment you decide fear will not own you. Strength is not about being the loudest in the room. It is about being the last one still standing for what is right." Her words wrapped around the silence,
pulling the girl's chin higher, her shoulders straighter, as if a spark had been passed from one life to another. The stockboy, who had nearly rushed in earlier, stepped forward too, his fists no longer clenched in anger, but open at his sides. "We won't let this happen again," he declared, his voice louder than he expected. Other employees nodded, one by one, a quiet chorus of agreement, building into something stronger. The fear that once smothered them had shifted into unity, and every person could feel it in their bones. Grace's eyes softened, though her posture remained sharp. "You do not fight alone," she told them. "Courage spreads, it multiplies. A single choice to stand can awaken 10 more. Tonight you all proved that." The old guard, Marcus, who had hovered near his radio, finally let out a breath he had held far too long. He stepped forward, placing his hand over his heart in a silent salute, not to her rank, but to the woman who had reminded him of duty. Around them, the shelves stood disordered, cans toppled and boxes crushed, but no one looked at the mess. All eyes stayed on Grace and the quiet authority she carried. The shoppers who once ducked for cover now moved closer, not as strangers, but as a community. The girl tucked her notebook under her arm, her face set with new resolve. The boy lifted his chin, no longer shrinking into the corners. They had seen what true strength looked like, and it had changed them. Grace knelt briefly, tying the laces of her shoes, tugging them tight with the precision of an old ritual. The act was simple, yet it carried weight, like a soldier preparing for whatever came next. That night, the store slowly emptied, but Grace remained behind, moving quietly through the aisles, helping gather what had been scattered. Her steps were steady, her hands calm, as she lifted boxes and straightened shelves, though the weight of the evening still lingered in the air. When the lights finally dimmed and the doors locked, she walked to the back room where a cracked mirror leaned against the wall. She paused, her reflection staring back, the scars on her shoulders faint beneath the fabric of her shirt. Her hand rose, brushing over them lightly. In the stillness, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I am still serving." By morning, word had spread faster than rumor ever could. The parking lot filled with cars and faces, some carrying flowers, others with handwritten notes. They crowded the entrance not out of curiosity, but gratitude. Inside, Marcus had cleared a wall near the registers and taped up the first card. "Thank you, Grace," it read, in bold, shaky letters. One by one, more were added, until the wall glowed with color, a mosaic of respect from a town that had found its courage. Grace worked as usual, scanning items, answering questions, stocking shelves, though now every eye that met hers carried something different. Mothers smiled warmly, teenagers lingered near just to be close. Even the old veteran who leaned on his cane returned, standing taller than before. They had not just witnessed a confrontation, they had seen proof that strength could live quietly until it was needed. Later that afternoon, a delivery arrived. A small box, worn at the corners. Inside lay a medal, polished though aged, a purple heart that had once been pinned to her chest in another life. She held it a long moment, then carried it to the wall and placed it among the letters, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The shoppers fell silent, watching as she stepped back, her eyes firm and proud. As the day faded, Jake, the young stockboy, approached, his voice low. "I've been thinking, maybe I should enlist." Grace studied him a long moment, then shook her head gently. "Do not run toward war to prove yourself," she said. "Find your purpose first. Protect what matters right here." He nodded, his eyes wide with respect. The crowd grew again at dusk, people gathering not for groceries, but for each other. Grace stood among them, her voice steady. "Courage is not about fighting. It is about refusing to bow to fear. If you believe that too, share it, live it, remind those around you." The shoppers applauded, their voices filling the store. Grace smiled faintly, knowing her service had not ended, it had only changed its form.